I slept in the barns and outbuildings of neighbors, stole eggs and ears of corn, walked until my legs shook from exhaustion, wept at the thought of my mother. They had taken her from me. Father and Jack Bart's. I hated myself for being too small to protect her. I hated my father for telling me such impossible, unspeakable things, and yet I knew they were the truth. I cannot explain how I knew with such certainty, but I did. The way my father had hushed us when we spun vampire yarns, the screams that had carried on the wind at night, my mother's fevered whispers about looking the devil in the eyes. Father was drunk, an indolent, loveless drunk, but he was no liar. During those 3 days of anger and grief, I gave into madness and admitted something to myself. I believed in vampires. I believed in them, and I hated them to the last. When he finally came home to a frightened stepmother and a silent father, Abe didn't say a word. He made straight for his journal and wrote down a single sentence, one that would radically alter the course of his life and bring a fledgling nation to the brink of collapse. I hereby resolve to kill every vampire in America. Part 3. Sarah had hoped that Abe would read to them after supper. It was getting late, but there was a good fire going and more than enough time for a few pages of Jonah's Adventure or Joseph's Coat of Many Colors. She loved the way Abe read to them. Such life, such expression and clarity. He had wisdom well beyond his years, manners and sweetness seldom found in a child. He was, as she would tell William Herndon after her stepson's assassination, the best boy I ever saw or ever hoped to see. But her Bible was nowhere to be found. Had she lent it to a neighbor or forgotten? Had she left it at Gregson's? She looked everywhere. She looked in vain. Sarah would never see her Bible again. Abe had burnt it. It was a rash act of an angry child, one that he would live to regret, though never enough, it seemed, to tell his stepmother the truth. Years later, he would attempt to explain himself. How could I worship a God who would permit vampires to exist? A God that had allowed my mother to fall prey to their evil. Footnote reads, it's not known how Bart killed Nancy Lincoln and the Sparrows, but based on information elsewhere in the journals, he likely administered a fool's dose of his own blood, pricking a finger and squeezing a few drops into a sleeping victim's mouth is the most common method. Such an amount is merely enough to produce the side effects of transformation, sickness, death, without any of its lasting benefits. End of footnote. The following reads, either he was powerless to stop it, or he was complicit in it. In either case, he was undeserving of my praise. In either case, he was my enemy. Such is the mind of an angry 11-year-old boy, one that sees the world as a choice between two disparate certainties, one that believes a thing must be this way or that. I am ashamed that it happened, yes, but I will not compound that shame by pretending that it did not. With his faith in ruins, 11-year-old Abe took his resolution a step further in this undated manifesto, August 1820. Henceforth my life shall be one of rigorous study and devotion. I shall become learned in all things. I shall become a greater warrior than Alexander. My life shall have but one purpose. That purpose is to kill. Footnote reads, it's interesting to note the repeated use of the words kill and killing in these early entries. Abe would later use the more accurate verbs destroy and slaughter. End of footnote. The following reads, as many vampires as I can. This journal shall be where I write about killing vampires. No one other than me shall read it. His interest in books, which to date had merely been ravenous, became obsessive. He walked more than an hour to the home of Aaron Stabell, a shoemaker who boasted a personal library of some 150 volumes, twice a week to return an armful of books and borrow another armful. He accompanied his stepmother to Elizabethtown whenever she visited a relative, sequestering himself in the village street home of Samuel Haycraft Sr., one of the town's founders, and the proud owner of nearly 500 books. Abe read about the occult, found mentions of vampires and European folklore. He compiled a list of their rumored weaknesses, markings, and habits. It became common for stepmother Sarah to find him asleep at the table in the morning, his head resting on an open page. When he wasn't improving his mind, Abe was hard at work improving his body. He doubled his daily wood chopping. He built long, winding stone walls. He practiced throwing his axe into a tree, first from 10 yards, then 20. When his stepbrother John invited him to play at war, he jumped at the chance and fought with a new intensity that left more than one neighborhood boy's lip bloodied. Based on the information he gathered in books, Abe whittled a dozen stakes and made a quiver to carry them in. He fashioned a small crucifix. Although he had declared God his enemy, it appeared that Abe wasn't opposed to his help. He took to carry small pouches of garlic and mustard seed. He sharpened his axe until the blade blinded all who looked upon it. At night he dreamed of death, of hunting down his enemy and driving stakes through their hearts, of taking their heads, of glorious battle. Years later, as the clouds of civil war loomed on the horizon, Abe looked back at his youthful bloodlust. There are but two types of men who desire war: those who haven't the slightest intention of fighting it themselves, and those who haven't the slightest idea what it is. Of my youth, I can decidedly say that the latter was true. I ached for this war with vampires, knowing nothing of its consequences, knowing nothing of holding a dying friend in my arms or burying a child. Any man who has seen the face of death knows better than to seek him out a second time. But in the summer of 1821, these lessons were still years off. Abe wanted his war with vampires, and after months of vigorous studying and exercise, he was ready to launch the opening salvo. He wrote a letter. Part 4. Abe was uncommonly tall for a boy of 12. He already stood shoulder to shoulder with his father, who was himself considered tall at 5'9". Like his ill-fated grandfather, good genes and years of toil had made him exceptionally strong. It was a Monday, the kind of summer day one finds only in Kentucky, shining and verdant. Abe and Thomas sat atop one of their smallest outbuildings, making repairs to its winter-beaten roof. They worked in silence. Though Abe's hatred had cooled, he still found it difficult to be in his father's presence. A journal entry dated December 2nd, 1843, not long after the birth of Abe's own son, Robert, sheds some light on the nature of his contempt. Age has made me temperate in many things, but on this point I remain steadfast. His weakness, his ineptness, he failed to protect his family, thought only of his own needs, and left others to their cost. Had he simply gathered us and fled to some far-off territory, had he merely asked our neighbors for some small advances against future work. But he did nothing, nothing but sit idly, silently, secretly hoping that somehow, by some miracle, his troubles would simply disappear. No, it needs no further elaboration than this. Had he been any other man, she would be with me still. This I could not forgive. Thomas, to his credit, seemed to understand and accept his condemnation. He hadn't mentioned the word vampire since that night, nor had he pressed Abe to talk. Sarah had taken the girls to help her clean Mr. Grayson's house that Monday afternoon, and John was off fighting some imaginary war. The two Lincolns were at work on the roof when a horse approached carrying a child on his back, a plump child in a green coat, either that or a very short man. A short man with dark glasses and one arm. It was Jack Bartz.